Hi everyone, my name is Emily and I'm a multimedia creative, walking artist, writer and researcher. Today I'll say a few words about Walking Interludes, which is a project I'm working on as part of my PhD. And Walking Interludes are a set of soundscapes that are made within protected landscapes and spaces within Wales. They are short meditative sound journeys and roughly seasonal. I'm trying to make one a month over 2026, so even if I don't quite manage that, there'll be some kind of seasonal arc. And they're made of field recordings, poetry, walking found sound, vocals and music. My PhD is a walking arts research project. Primarily, it's a PhD about walking and being creative. I'm looking at the idea of desire lines as a metaphor, which are those little intuitive pathways that go off to the side and through less laid out areas, perhaps, that might call us, these little pathways that call to our intuition. I'm looking at slow media as my creative practice, which I'll talk about a bit later, as a pathway to divergent belonging. We might say neurodivergent belonging or inclusive belonging within the therapeutic landscape. So that's just an idea from geography research about how landscapes might be seen as therapeutic, and I'll talk about that later as well. So I'd worked with audio before, but field recording and making soundscapes is a new skill set I've been learning throughout my PhD. Using a relatively basic setup, I'm learning how to use a few special microphones and things, but I'm trying to keep it simple and focus on this as a learning journey or a sensory journey, which is about attention and mindfulness, keeping it simple, like I say, and really just going into these site-specific experiences as meditative journeys rather than trying to focus on technology overly. And in my research, I'm trying to draw connections between protected spaces and protected characteristics, 9 of which were defined in the Equality Act of 2010, which obviously was quite some time ago now and could probably do with some updating. So I've added a few things in here. For example, our definitions and understandings of gender have massively expanded since 2010. I think pregnancy and pregnant women were included in the original Equality Act, but things like people without children or people are living alone were not. Things like menopause have also come onto the inclusivity agenda, and I think our understanding of inclusivity is something which is starting to move beyond categories. I do some of my sound work solo, but I also walk with other people, other creative practitioners, and record shared experiences and contributions in the form of vocals, dialogue, words, but also possibly music and poetry and improvised sound. So, for example, I recorded a soundscape and a set of sounds on the banks of the River Dee in North East Wales with harpist Jenny Wild Parks recently. And it's interesting to try and define protected spaces through creative practice. So, for example, in January it was snowing a lot and I had to go into my local churchyard to make a soundscape because I couldn't travel because I was snowed in. And other occasions I visited like national landscapes or sites within national parks, RSPB reserves such as Innis here, or the Celtic rainforest sites or the coastal paths. So I think what defines a protected space is also a very flexible conversation. Luckily, there's lots of recent research about how field recording and listening to nature sounds is good for us. It lowers our heart rate, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, it aids recovery from stress, there are several mood benefits, it increases our attention, and I've definitely experienced some of these effects doing more listening work and audio work myself. So what kind of data am I collecting through making these sound journeys? Well, I'm still finding out, but here are some thoughts. There's things like sensory data. Sound, for example, can be really physical. It can trigger physical reactions. embodied experiences, memories, things like sensory processes are related to that. The presence of certain species, there might be a particular bird or an animal that comes through on recording, also people, or the presence of not people or people relating to the different species that are there, so more than human, multi-species relationships. Noise pollution is a big one because it's hard to find anywhere to record in the UK anywhere without the presence of traffic, unless you go really far into a wilderness or pick your times of day very carefully. And these are my impressions and interpretations gathered of places, sometimes with other voices, other inputs, but I'm walking with particular lenses as a researcher and a human, and lived experiences. So things like women walking, the experience of being a woman walking and all the things that play into that, often the experience of walking alone, things like walking with neurodivergent, walking as a beneficiary of white privilege, and walking with a fairly recent experience of traumatic bereavement and grief. So whatever we've got going on, a variety of things are going to affect us day to day, our mental health, our abilities, our capacities, our ability to relate to other beings within the environment, our ability to pay attention. So these things, while some things are fixed, it's also can be a shifting field. And I'm looking at various practitioners within my research and walking arts, environmental arts more broadly. People like Paulina Liveros are very popular right now, who is often referenced for coining the term deep listening, although we could say that idea comes from a variety of sources. People like Jez Riley-French and his daughter Phoebe make the contact microphones and hydrophones I've been using in my sound work, and people like Jonathan Stalls, who's a walking artist and activist based in Colorado in the States. And Jonathan has founded an organisation called Pedestrian Dignity, which looks at our freedom and mobility and empowerment as people moving through the world, in a very traffic dominated world. And Jonathan conducts a lot of activism through his creative practice on behalf of people who live with disabilities or other marginalised groups. And these walking interludes are linked to a podcast I've been making for a couple of years now called Desire Lines. And walking interludes are a standalone project, as is the podcast, but I also publish the interludes between conversational episodes at the moment, just for series 2, to try out that balance of kind of dialogue and interview style podcasts mixed with something more experiential and creative. So in general, I think we can start to group these things under the term listening arts. As podcasts are very popular, a form of social media, but also they are a source of really great content and are often very artistically curated. So I'll just hop back to slow media to explain that a little bit. So slow media grew out of movements like slow food and slow travel, and it's kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit, which I think is a shame because I think it's very useful as a term, and it appeals to me as someone who does lots of different things to explain my creative practice and my kind of positioning as a writer and creator, because the slow movements across the board promoted things like mindfulness, conscious consumption, quality over quantity. So it's about slowing down and really caring about the things that we create rather than aiming to just put content out there for the sake of it. So I think we can resituate slow media as an interdisciplinary art form which benefits individual, collective and environmental well-being. And I trained as a graphic designer originally and then became a community artist and a writer and lots of other things, and I continued to work in media in various ways. So although I'm working with audio for the Walking Interludes project, I don't categorise myself as one kind of artist or maker. Within this Walking Arts PhD, I am also making zines, artist books and a set of cards which are part of a toolkit to look at inclusion within the landscape in various multisensory ways. And I'd also like to expand on the idea of therapeutic landscapes. As I mentioned before, it's a term from geography research, and I've picked up on it because I think it's useful as something that looks at the landscape in terms of layers of therapeutic value. So because I'm looking at protected characteristics and protected spaces, that idea of breaking down the landscape into layers of healing or opportunities for healing is very appealing to me as a creative and a researcher. So in practical terms, that might mean things like audio describing. So audio describing an experience or a landscape for people who have vision loss or sight impairment. It might include multilingual experiences, and Welsh language is a very important aspect of that, working within Wales. And things like trauma-informed, for example, are practice. Trauma-informed practice are very commonplace words now within many fields. But what does that mean when we're working in a landscape? How can we create safer spaces and experiences for people trying to access the outdoors and walking experiences? It might include things like learning styles, which obviously relates to sensory processing, and how do we look at that in terms of landscape and the outdoors. So those are just some ideas. And I'd like to leave you with some reflections and questions to take into your day after watching this presentation, maybe the next few days. Reflecting on things like what layers of sound you can hear if you stop and close your eyes and really listen. What's around you in the field of your landscape or environments on an auditory level. And just even stopping to listen can be a radical act. Maybe ask yourself when you last stopped just to listen. And perhaps going back into memories of places you've been, there might be a place whose sounds you remember more than its appearance. And perhaps you can remember being somewhere that was completely silent, with no noise at all. How did it feel? And in general, what sounds help you feel most connected to the landscape or the environment around you? Can you listen to or tune into those sounds just a little bit more? Thank you very much for listening. O diolch as we say in Wales. My contact details are below. You can follow me on Instagram _@wildmargins, or you can find my Wild Margins publication on Substack. Thank you for taking time to watch this video.